Keanu Reeves notices a lonely girl buying diapers in Walmart. When he decides to follow her home to make sure she gets home safely, he uncovers the heartbreaking truth behind this young girl. Why was this girl shopping for diapers all alone? And what would Keanu Reeves discover? Watch until the end to find out what happened. You don't want to miss this one. The night was dark and quiet as Keanu Reeves drove along the deserted road outside the city. It was 9:30 p.m., and he was on his way to a filming location for the next morning's shoot. The empty road stretched ahead and behind him, illuminated only by his headlights and the occasional passing car. Suddenly, without warning, the handbrake warning light illuminated on his dashboard. Keanu frowned, his brow furrowing in concern. He pressed down on the accelerator, but to his dismay, the car began to lose power. Though it continued to drift, Keanu skillfully maneuvered the vehicle to the shoulder of the road before it finally came to a complete stop. Keanu sighed, running a hand through his hair as he assessed the situation. He switched on the hazard lights, their blinking glow piercing through the darkness, a silent call for help in the night. Determined to get moving again, he turned the key in the ignition, but the engine sputtered weakly before falling silent. Undeterred, he tried again, shifting through the gears in hopes of finding a spark of life, but the car remained unresponsive. Vexation crept in as he leaned back against the seat, pondering his next move. Stepping out of the car, Keanu was immediately enveloped by the cool night air. He shivered slightly, zipping up his jacket as he began to methodically check each component of the vehicle. First, he examined the wheels, running his hands over the tires to check for any obvious issues. Finding nothing amiss, he moved on to the handbrake mechanism, inspecting it carefully for any signs of malfunction. Finally, Keanu lifted the hood of the car, peering into the engine compartment. The temperature gauge read normal, and nothing appeared obviously wrong. This only deepened his confusion about the warning light and the sudden power loss. He closed the hood with a soft thud, feeling a growing sense of frustration. Back in the driver's seat, Keanu reached for his phone. Years of dealing with unexpected situations on film sets had taught him to remain calm in such circumstances. His voice was steady as he dialed roadside assistance, providing his plate number and location details. "I'm on Main Road 101, he explained to the dispatcher. It's a quiet arterial road stretching about 25 kilometers through the outskirts of a small suburban neighborhood called Willow Creek Hollow. The area is nestled between rolling hills and sparsely lit residential blocks. I'm approximately 10 kilometers south of the nearest gas station, and about 5 kilometers from the next turnoff, there seems to be a supermarket nearby and a row of scattered houses." The dispatcher listened attentively, promising to send help but warning that it might take some time given the late hour. "Please keep your phone ready at hand, Mr. Reeves," the dispatcher added. "We may need to reach you to confirm your specific location at any time." Keanu agreed, thanking the dispatcher before ending the call. As he set his phone down, he noticed something that sent a jolt of alarm through him. His battery was critically low, now below 5%. This new development brought a fresh wave of urgency to his situation. He needed to stay in contact with both the repair service and his assistant managing tomorrow's filming schedule. Keanu scanned his surroundings desperately until his eyes settled on an illuminated sign a few blocks away. The fluorescent glow of a Walmart stood out like a beacon of hope against the otherwise dark landscape. It was the only nearby store where he might quickly find a charger or power bank for his phone. Keanu weighed his options. The store was likely close to closing time, but he couldn't risk losing contact with the repair service or his team. With a determined nod, he made his decision. He would have to make a quick trip to the store and hope he could find what he needed before it closed. Keanu stepped out of his car, ensuring it was securely locked before heading toward the Walmart. His footsteps echoed on the empty road as he made his way across several blocks to the store's parking lot. As he neared the entrance, his breath was warm and labored from the walk, but the cool breeze brushing against his face offered some relief. The store's exterior stretched out before him, a vast retail space that appeared largely deserted, with most of the overhead lights dimmed in preparation for closing time. By the time he reached the entrance, Keanu noticed that most of the doors were already locked. Only one side of the automatic doors remained operational, sliding open with a soft hiss as he approached. The store's interior felt eerily quiet, a stark contrast to its usual daytime bustle. Inside, Keanu's eyes darted around the dimly lit store, scanning for any sign of staff. The atmosphere was eerily quiet, with not a single customer in sight. At the front register, he finally spotted a young woman engrossed in counting the day's cash. Her name tag read Maria, but she seemed too focused on her task to notice his presence. Keanu stepped up to the counter and cleared his throat softly to catch her attention. "Excuse me," he said politely, his voice cutting through the silence. "Could you point me to the electronics section?" Maria continued counting, barely glancing up as she vaguely pointed toward the back of the store. "Electronics is that way," she muttered, her tone clipped and disinterested. "Store's closing in 15 minutes, just so you know." It was clear from her curt response that she didn't recognize him in his casual clothes and character-specific highlighted hair. Keanu nodded his thanks, not bothered by the lack of recognition. He was more concerned with finding a charger, or better, power bank, before the store closed. As he made his way toward the electronics section, a movement caught his eye near the personal care aisle. Keanu paused, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. A small figure stood alone in the aisle, a girl who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old. She was wearing only a white tank top and underwear, her small form looking incredibly vulnerable under the harsh fluorescent lights. Keanu felt an immediate surge of concern for the child. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of a parent or guardian, but the surrounding aisles were empty. He found himself torn between his urgent need for a power bank and his growing worry for this lone child. For a moment, Keanu stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. The girl hadn't noticed him yet, seemingly engrossed in examining something on one of the shelves. He knew he needed to act quickly, both to help the child and to secure a charger before the store closed. With a deep breath, Keanu made his decision. He would quickly check on the girl and then rush to find a charger. Surely, he thought, there must be a reasonable explanation for her presence here alone. Keanu moved cautiously toward the young girl, his footsteps deliberately soft to avoid startling her. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to exaggerate the frailty of her small frame. Dressed in nothing but a white tank top and underwear, she looked impossibly vulnerable, her bare arms crossed tightly over her chest, as though trying to shield herself from the cold or the world around her. He crouched a few feet away, lowering himself to her level. "Hey there," he began softly, his voice calm and gentle, like trying to coax a frightened animal. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl turned her head slowly, her wide eyes meeting his. They shone with an unsettling mix of curiosity and mistrust, her lips pressing into a tight, thin line, as if weighing whether she could trust him. She didn't speak, but her gaze lingered, studying him as though trying to decide whether he was friend or foe. Keanu hesitated, unsure of how to proceed without scaring her. Before he could say more, a faint vibration in his pocket broke the moment. He reached for his phone instinctively, only to feel his stomach drop as the screen flickered and went dark. The battery had finally given out, severing his last connection to the repair service. The urgency of his situation hit him like a wave. He was faced with a cruel choice: stay with the child, who clearly needed help, or leave her briefly to find a power bank so he could continue contacting assistance. His chest tightened as he debated internally, guilt already creeping in at the mere thought of walking away, even for a moment. "Listen," he said gently, his tone reassuring yet tinged with urgency. "I need to grab something really quick, but I promise I'll be right back. Can you stay right here for me? I'm going to find someone to help you, okay?" The girl blinked at him, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her silence unnerved him, but Keanu forced a smile, hoping to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "I'll be back soon," he promised again, before rising to his feet and stepping away. His legs felt heavy with reluctance as he left her behind. As he crossed the store, Keanu's eyes swept the aisles, searching desperately for a store employee. The rows of neatly stocked shelves seemed endless, their silence oppressive, until finally, near the middle of the store, he spotted someone kneeling in an aisle, their hands busy organizing inventory. "Excuse me," Keanu called out, his voice steady but firm. The worker turned, a young man in his early 20s, his apron slightly askew. He glanced up, startled, then quickly stood when he saw a customer was addressing him. "There's a little girl in the personal care section," Keanu explained without preamble. "She's alone, wearing just a tank top and underwear. She needs help." The worker's brow furrowed, and he muttered something under his breath that sounded like, "That little thief again." Keanu's expression hardened. "What do you mean by that?" The man's face flushed as he realized who he was speaking to. His jaw slackened and his eyes widened with recognition. "Wait, are you... Oh my God, you're Keanu Reeves," he stammered, his inventory forgotten as he gawked. "Yes," Keanu said, his tone even but impatient. "But right now I'm more concerned about that little girl. Can you help her?" The worker snapped out of his daze and scrambled to his feet. "Yes, of course, Mr. Reeves. I'll handle it right away. We've seen her around here before." Keanu's frown deepened. "Seen her before? Hasn't anyone done anything to help her?" The worker, whose name tag read Mark, looked sheepish, avoiding eye contact. "She comes and goes. We've tried to ask her questions, but she always runs off before we can figure anything out." Keanu clenched his fists, frustration bubbling under his calm exterior. "I need to find a power bank urgently," he said after a beat, his voice tight. "Can you promise me you'll take care of her?" Mark nodded quickly, his earlier awkwardness replaced by determination. "Absolutely, Mr. Reeves. I'll make sure she's okay." Keanu exhaled sharply, nodding as he turned to follow Mark back toward the personal care aisle. As they approached, Keanu's gaze fixed on the girl, still sitting in the same spot where he'd left her. Mark stepped forward hesitantly, his voice low as he addressed her. "Hey, sweetheart," Mark said gently. "Are you all right? Let's get you somewhere safe." Keanu lingered for a moment, watching as the girl glanced up at Mark, her expression softening slightly. Feeling a flicker of relief, he told himself she was in good hands. With that, he forced himself to turn away, heading toward the electronics section. Even as he quickened his pace, his mind remained divided, half focused on finding a power bank, the other half still thinking about the mysterious girl and the secrets she seemed to carry in her silence. Keanu quickly located the electronics section, his eyes scanning the shelves until he found a suitable power bank. He grabbed it off the display, his movements hurried as he made his way back to the front counter. As he walked, his attention remained divided between watching for the girl, who was still talking with Mark in the same aisle, and focusing on completing his purchase. Despite Mark's assurances, worry continued to gnaw at him. Back at the register, Maria finally looked up as she scanned the power bank. "That'll be $29.99, she said, her tone still professional and detached. However, as she raised her eyes to meet Keanu's, her expression transformed in an instant. The professional detachment melted away, replaced by wide-eyed recognition and excitement. "Oh my God," Maria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You're Keanu Reeves. I'm so sorry I didn't recognize you earlier. I've been on my feet for hours and I was just so focused on closing up." She trailed off, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Keanu offered her a kind smile, understanding her situation. "No need to apologize," he said warmly. "I completely understand. Long shifts can be exhausting." Maria's embarrassment quickly gave way to enthusiasm. "Would it be okay if I got a photo with you?" she asked, her voice bubbling with excitement. "I promise I won't post it on social media or anything. It would just be for me." Keanu paused mid-conversation, a nagging sense of unease pulling his eyes back toward the spot where he had last seen the young girl in the personal care section. To his relief, she was no longer there. A thought crossed his mind as he assumed Mark had already escorted her somewhere safe. However, as he looked at another aisle at the further side of the store, a jarring sight made him pause. The girl had reappeared, but she was now alone in the baby care section, her small figure almost hidden among the towering shelves of brightly colored packaging. Keanu's brow furrowed as he tried to find Mark. He was nowhere nearby. He watched the girl's movements, methodical, deliberate, and far too practiced for a child her age. Torn between his desire to approach the girl again and not wanting to disappoint Maria, Keanu nodded his agreement to the photo. "Of course," he said, forcing his attention back to the cashier. "Just a quick one, though, if that's all right." Maria beamed, quickly pulling out her phone. As she positioned herself next to Keanu for the selfie, he couldn't help but continue watching the young girl from the corner of his eye. The girl was reaching up with surprising precision, her small hands clutching at the edges of 2 packs of small diapers. With a soft grunt of effort, she pulled them down, letting them land on the ground with a quiet thud. There was no hesitation in her actions, no fumbling or confusion, as if she had done this exact thing many times before. The camera flashed, snapping Keanu back to the present, capturing a slightly distracted version of himself standing beside an overjoyed Maria. "Thank you so much," Maria gushed as she checked the photo. "You've made my whole week." Keanu smiled politely, his mind already racing with concern for the child, and he felt a pang in his chest. There was something deeply unsettling about the scene, her isolation, her quiet determination, and the absence of Mark, who had promised to help her. For a moment he simply stood there, uncertain whether to intervene or continue paying for his power bank. "Sir?" Maria greeted him again, pulling him back to the moment. "I'm sorry, how do you like to pay for your purchase?" Keanu blinked, momentarily snapping out of his thoughts. "Oh, sorry about that," he said with a small smile, regaining his composure. "I'll pay with card." He quickly handed over his payment, the transaction processed smoothly. As the receipt printed, Keanu felt a small wave of relief sweep over him. He grabbed the power bank in haste, plugging it into his phone as the green charging symbol flickered onto the screen. A quiet sense of victory settled in as he watched the phone start charging, one immediate crisis averted, though the other, the girl, still piqued his curiosity. As Keanu considered leaving, Maria's voice pulling his gaze back to the cashier. To his surprise, the little girl was now approaching the counter, the 2 packs of diapers clutched tightly in her small hands. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, avoiding anyone's gaze as she shuffled forward. When she reached the counter, she hesitated for a moment before pulling out a crumpled dollar bill from the waistband of her underwear. The money was wrinkled and worn, as though it had been kept there for some time. Maria, still behind the counter, gave the girl a sympathetic but firm look. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "I'm sorry, but this isn't enough to cover the diapers. You need at least $5 more." The girl's eyes widened, her hands tightening around the dollar bill, but she didn't respond. She seemed to shrink under the weight of Maria's words, her face a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. Keanu watched this unfold, a sense of frustration creeping up his spine. It was clear that the girl was in over her head, and she was too young to be left to navigate this alone. Without a second thought, he stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension in the air. "Maria," Keanu said, his tone soft yet firm, "I'll cover the difference." Maria looked up, startled, then smiled in recognition. "Mr. Reeves, are you sure?" Keanu nodded, his eyes still on the girl, who now looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with uncertainty. "Yes, I'm sure," he replied, pulling out his wallet and handing Maria the required cash. He turned to the girl, his voice reassuring. "Don't worry, you're not alone in this." Maria nodded and rang up the diapers, handing the girl her purchase. As the transaction completed, Keanu turned to the child, giving her a gentle smile. "There you go," he said, his voice warm. "It's all taken care of." The girl hesitated for a moment, her grip still tight on the diapers. Then, slowly, she looked up at Keanu, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, sir," she said. "Don't mention it." Keanu said. Then he turned to Maria, a question forming on his lips. "Where's that staff member, Mark? The last time I saw him, he was with this little girl." Maria's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, clearly not wanting to get pulled into the situation. "I'm not sure," she said, her voice hesitant. "He might be finishing stock-taking in one of the aisles or in the back storage room." Keanu pressed further. Mark mentioned this little girl had been visiting the store more than once. Do you know anything about that? Maria shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. After a moment of awkward silence, she reached for the intercom. "I'll call him," she said, her voice tight. "Mark to the front counter, please. Mark to the front counter." Within moments, Mark appeared, his expression a mix of confusion and nervousness as he approached. Keanu turned to face him, his usually calm demeanor tinged with frustration. "Mark," Keanu began, his voice low but intense, "why did you leave the girl alone despite your promise to help her? Don't you understand the potential dangers of an unaccompanied minor in the store?" Mark's eyes darted between Keanu and Maria, clearly uncomfortable. Well, you see, Mr. Reeves," he stammered, "we've had issues with her before. She comes in, takes things. We can't really do much about it. It's not really our responsibility to find her parents or anything. Earlier, I have told her kindly to leave, but here she's again." Keanu's expression hardened. "Not your responsibility?" he repeated, his voice incredulous. "If you can't locate her parents, it's your duty to contact the authorities. This child could be in danger." Mark shifted his weight, avoiding Keanu's gaze. "Look, it's late and we're about to close. I still have stock taking to finish. We can't get involved every time some kid wanders in here." Keanu opened his mouth to respond, but movement caught his eye. The girl had slipped away during their conversation and was now walking quickly towards the store exit. Without another word to Mark or Maria, Keanu hurried after her, worry etched across his face. Keanu was surprised by the girl's speed and agility as she made her way out of the store. He quickened his pace, following her through the automatic doors and into the parking lot. "Wait!" he called out, his voice tinged with concern. Just as he caught up to her, his newly charged phone rang in his pocket. Keanu fumbled for it, alternating between answering and keeping his attention on the child. Recognizing the number as the repair technician, he quickly answered. "Hello?" he said, slightly out of breath. The repair technician's voice came through, clearly frustrated but still professional. "Hello, Mr. Reeves, where are you? I've located your car, but I haven't seen you yet. I've been waiting here for a little while." Keanu attempted to calm him down, his gaze fixed on the girl who had stopped nearby to pick up one of the diapers that had fallen to the floor. "I'm really sorry," he said quickly. "There was an emergency. I promise I'll be there in 10 minutes. Could you please wait?" The technician's grunt of annoyance suggested limited patience, but he agreed to wait. Keanu ended the call, his mind racing as he faced a critical decision. The repairman's presence offered a chance to fix his car and make tomorrow's filming schedule, but the girl's vulnerable situation tugged at his conscience. He watched as the girl started walking again, the small diaper bags appearing heavy in her tiny hands. This time, she headed toward the parking lot, her small form bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights, the diapers pressed tightly against her chest. In that quiet, fleeting moment, Keanu knew what he had to do. He made his choice. He paced up to her side and followed her. "Hey," he called out gently, quickening his pace to catch up to her. "We haven't had the chance to properly introduce ourselves. My name is Keanu. Can you tell me yours?" The girl looked up at him, her eyes wary but not frightened. "Lila," she said softly. Keanu smiled warmly. "That's a beautiful name, Lila. Listen, it's not safe for you to be out here alone. Would it be okay if I walked you home?" Lila considered for a moment, then gave a small nod. As they began to walk, Keanu tried to engage her in conversation. "Lila, do you live far from here?" She shook her head, pointing across the street to a clearly impoverished neighborhood. Keanu's concern deepened as he took in the run-down buildings and dimly lit streets. "You know," he said carefully, "I have a car. It's broken right now, but there's a repairman fixing it. Would you like to wait with me and then I could drive you home? It might be safer than walking." Lila's response was immediate and firm. "No," she said, her voice small but determined. "Mommy says never go in strangers' cars." Keanu nodded, respecting her caution, even as his worry grew. "That's very smart of you, Lila. Your mom is right about that. Okay, we'll walk then. Is that all right?" Lila nodded, and they continued their journey in silence. Keanu's mind racing with questions and concerns about this young girl's situation. As they walked through the darkening streets, Keanu kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. The neighborhood grew increasingly run down, with boarded-up windows and overflowing trash bins lining the sidewalks. Finally, Lila came to a stop in front of a particularly dilapidated house. "My home," she said simply, pointing to the structure. Then, turning to Keanu, she added, "You go now." Keanu hesitated, his concern growing as he took in the poor condition of the house. The paint was peeling, several windows were cracked, and the small front yard was overgrown with weeds. It didn't look like a safe environment for a child. Before he could respond, his phone rang again. Keanu answered quickly, recognizing the number of the repair technician. "Mr. Reeves," the man's voice came through, clearly exasperated. "It's been well over 10 minutes. I can't wait all night." Keanu ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of his conflicting responsibilities. "I understand," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm dealing with an urgent situation. If you could just give me a little more time." "Time is money," the technician interrupted. "I've got other calls to attend to." "I'll pay extra," Keanu offered quickly. "Double your usual rate, triple even. Just please give me a bit more time." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a reluctant sigh. "Fine, but make it quick. I won't wait all night, no matter how much you're paying." The call ended, leaving Keanu standing in front of Lila's house, still caught in a swirl of uncertainty as he debated his next move. He was torn between the urge to knock on the door and speak with Lila's guardians, hoping to find out more about the situation, and the instinct to respect their privacy, not wanting to overstep. His internal struggle was cut short when, just as he was about to make up his mind, Lila suddenly emerged from the house, carrying a plastic bag that emitted a distinctly unpleasant odor, drawing his attention immediately. Keanu watched in stunned silence as the young girl, with surprising efficiency, disposed of the bag, clearly containing used diapers, into a nearby garbage bin. The image of her, so small, yet handling such an adult responsibility, struck him deeply. She was still clad only in her underwear and tank top, her vulnerability stark against the harshness of her actions. The sight left him no room for doubt. His decision to investigate further was solidified. "Lila," he called softly, "I'd like to speak with your parents. Is that okay?" Lila turned to him, her expression unreadable. "No parents," she said simply. Keanu felt his heart sink at her words. "Is there any adult inside?" he asked gently. Lila shook her head, and in that moment, Keanu felt a surge of determination wash over him. His voice softened, yet there was a firmness in his words. "Lila, I know I'm a stranger, but I really want to help. Would it be all right if I came inside? I just want to make sure you're okay." The girl considered his words carefully, her young face scrunched in deep thought as she weighed her options. After a moment of hesitation, she slowly reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his with a quiet urgency. The gesture was both trusting and tinged with desperation, as though she was finally beginning to trust him. Keanu could feel the gravity of the situation in that simple touch, and as they walked towards the house, a deep sense of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders, reminding him of the important decision he had just made. As soon as they crossed the threshold, Lila quickly released Keanu's hand and darted into the oppressive darkness of the house. "Wait!" Keanu called after her, his voice filled with concern, but she had already vanished from sight. The interior of the house was pitch black, a thick, suffocating quiet settling over the space. The only light came from the faint glow of streetlights filtering weakly through the grimy, cracked windows, barely illuminating the cluttered and neglected rooms. Keanu fumbled along the wall, his fingers brushing against the cold, peeling wallpaper as he searched for a light switch, but his efforts proved fruitless. Just as frustration began to rise, he heard the unmistakable patter of small feet returning, the sound echoing eerily in the stillness. Lila reappeared from the darkness, but this time she wasn't alone. She was leading a young boy by the hand, no more than 2 years old, his tiny figure barely visible in the low light. "This is June," Lila said quietly, her voice a little more serious now as she gestured to the toddler. "My brother. Please help." Keanu's heart clenched at the sight of the two young children, so small and fragile, standing alone in the dark, seemingly abandoned house. The weight of their vulnerability settled heavily on his chest. His first instinct was to comfort them, to make them feel safe, but he knew he needed to be gentle, careful. He crouched down to their level, trying to soften his presence, ensuring that he didn't appear threatening in any way. "Hi, June," Keanu said softly, offering a kind smile as he met the toddler's wide, uncertain eyes. "I'm Keanu. It's nice to meet you." He turned to Lila again. "And how can I help you, Lila? May I come in?" Lila nodded, but June regarded him silently, clinging to his sister's hand. Keanu stood slowly, his eyes adjusting to the darkness enough to make out the outline of a light switch on the further wall. He flicked it on, and the sudden brightness made all three of them blink rapidly. As his eyes adjusted, Keanu took in the full state of their living conditions. The house was in complete disarray. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, clothes strewn across the floor, and a pervasive smell of neglect hanging in the air. He turned back to the children, his heart heavy with the reality of their situation. "Lila," he said gently, "can you tell me about your parents? Where are they?" Lila's brow furrowed as she tried to explain in her limited English. "Mommy come, mommy go," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "We alone 2 nights, maybe 3 tonight." "And your father?" Keanu prompted softly. Lila shook her head, her gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before she spoke. "No father," she said simply, her voice soft but matter-of-fact, as though she had said these words many times before. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Sometimes men come with mommy, not stay." Keanu's heart sank at her words. The casual way she spoke of their neglect made it all the more heartbreaking. It was clear that this kind of situation, this abandonment, this lack of stability, was a norm for Lila and June, and that reality hit Keanu like a wave. How could 2 children so young be left to fend for themselves? He swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. "You've been very brave," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of you, taking care of each other like this." Lila nodded solemnly, her small face serious and older than her years. The weight of her responsibility hung around her, making her seem far beyond her age. Then, after a moment of quiet, she tugged at Keanu's hand, pulling him from his thoughts. "We hungry," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, help." Keanu's concern deepened, his chest tightening at her words. He hadn't even thought about food before. His mind had been consumed with so many other things. If he had known earlier, he would have bought something for them back at Walmart. His mind raced briefly, but he pushed the thoughts aside. What mattered now was getting them what they needed. "Of course you are," Keanu replied, his voice warm and comforting, though his heart ached for the children. "Let's see what we can find, okay?" He gave Lila a reassuring smile, trying to offer a sense of stability in the chaos of the moment. He followed Lila into the kitchen, June toddling along behind them. The refrigerator, when opened, was nearly empty, save for a few questionable items and stale leftover food. In the cupboards, Keanu found an empty formula can and milk powder scattered across a shelf, along with a measuring scoop, evidence of the children's desperate attempts to feed themselves. As Keanu surveyed the dire situation before him, his phone rang once again. The repair technician's number flashed on the screen, a stark reminder of the world outside this neglected home. Keanu hesitated for a moment, his mind racing between the urgent needs of the children and the looming repair issue. He answered the call, trying to steady his thoughts, but the weight of the responsibility in front of him was overwhelming. "Hello?" Keanu said, his voice tinged with the frustration of trying to juggle everything at once. As the technician's voice came through, Keanu's mind spun, trying to quickly formulate a plan. He knew he couldn't simply take the children with him to his car or drive them somewhere to eat. What if the mother returned while they were gone? What if she saw them leaving with a stranger? The thought sent a pang of worry through him. He couldn't risk making the situation worse, but he also couldn't ignore the children's hunger. "Mr. Reeves," the technician's voice was curt. "I've waited long enough. I'm about to leave." Keanu made a split-second decision. "I understand. I'm on my way right now. Please, just give me 5 more minutes." After ending the call, Keanu turned back to the children, his voice soft yet sincere. "Lila, June, I need to go fix my car. Someone's waiting for me," he explained gently, kneeling down to their level. "But I promise I'll come back with food for you. Can you wait here for me just a little while?" His tone was calm and reassuring, hoping to ease their uncertainty. Lila nodded solemnly, her expression serious. "We don't go anywhere," she assured him. "We wait. But before you go, can you help us? In the upper pantry, milk." Keanu's heart tightened as he heard her words. He gave her a soft smile before walking over to the pantry. Lila pointed to a high shelf, and Keanu reached up, retrieving the second can of formula that she couldn't quite reach on her own. As he handed it to her, the weight of the moment hit him. The simplicity of the task, something so small, yet so significant, drove home just how much these young children had been struggling with basic needs that no child should ever have to worry about. Keanu then moved to the kitchen counter, carefully measuring out the formula and mixing it with water, preparing the milk for June. Lila watched him closely, her gaze a mixture of hope and trust. When the bottle was ready, Keanu handed it to Lila with a soft, reassuring smile. "Here you go," he said gently. "This will help him." The act, though simple, felt like one of the most important things he could do for them in that moment. As Keanu prepared to leave, Lila looked up at him with a quiet urgency before he reached the door. "Can you help me one more time to turn off lights?" she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy doesn't like it on." The simple request, said in such a matter-of-fact way, added another layer to their difficult home situation. He wondered just how much the children had learned to live in fear of their mother's moods. He glanced around the dimly lit house and nodded quietly, understanding the weight of her words. "All right, Lila, I'll turn them off," he replied softly. As he reached for the light switches, he could feel the heaviness of the atmosphere in the house, the sense of rules and fears that governed every corner. The darkness settled over them once more, as the lights flicked off, and Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that this small act of turning off the lights had symbolized something much bigger, something about the control they had grown accustomed to living under. Keanu's mind raced as he hurried back to his car. The plight of Lila and June weighed heavily on his conscience, their vulnerable situation a stark contrast to the world he usually inhabited. As he approached his vehicle, he saw the repair technician leaning against it, his face a mask of irritation. "Finally," the man grumbled as Keanu came into view. "I was about to leave." "I'm sorry for the delay," Keanu said, handing over his car keys. "There was an emergency." The technician grunted in response, his tone flat and clearly uninterested in any explanations. Without missing a beat, he curtly asked Keanu to unlock the car, then proceeded to set to work without further delay. His movements were quick and practiced as he examined the vehicle's systems, poking and prodding under the hood, and then inside the car with the same methodical precision Keanu had come to expect from someone in his line of work. "Looks like it was a software glitch," the technician explained, his voice steady but slightly dismissive, as if it were an everyday issue. "I've reset the electronic brake system and cleared the error codes. It should be drivable now, but I'd recommend getting it properly serviced at a repair shop in the morning to make sure everything's running smoothly." Keanu nodded, grateful for the quick resolution but feeling a twinge of urgency in the pit of his stomach. He reached for his wallet and handed over the payment, adding a generous tip for the technician's patience and efficiency. The technician pocketed the money without a word, busying himself with gathering his tools. Keanu's eyes, however, were already drifting elsewhere, his thoughts shifting rapidly back to the children he had left behind. With the car now functional again, Keanu's first instinct was to head straight back to Walmart. He had promised to bring food, and he wanted to make sure they were taken care of. The engine hummed steadily beneath him as he drove, but the weight of the situation still weighed heavily on his mind. The thought of Lila and June, alone in that dark house, gnawed at him with every passing mile. As he pulled into the parking lot of the Walmart, however, his heart sank. The once bright parking lot, which had been bustling earlier in the evening, was now eerily quiet. The streetlights flickered dimly, casting long shadows across the pavement. The store itself stood dark, its doors locked, the bright neon lights that had been so inviting now reduced to a faint, tired glow. The store had completely closed for the night. Keanu felt a brief surge of frustration, but he quickly pushed it aside. There was no time to dwell on it. He needed to think on his feet. He grabbed his phone and opened the GPS, looking for alternatives. That's when he spotted it. There's a 24/7 gas station store down the road. It wasn't ideal. It didn't offer the same selection or the warmth of a familiar place, but it would have to do. Without hesitating, he turned the car and drove toward the station, following his GPS. After several minutes of driving in the quiet of the night, he pulled into the station's lot. The bright fluorescent lights of the small convenience store flickered overhead, offering a faint sense of comfort in the otherwise empty space. Keanu parked, his thoughts already racing ahead as he hurried inside. His hand gripped the cold metal of the basket as he quickly moved down the aisles, grabbing whatever he could find. Bread, snacks, milk, anything that might help feed the children and keep them settled until he could figure out what to do next. Cup noodles, canned foods, and formula milk quickly filled the basket. As an afterthought, he added a coffee for himself, knowing he'd need the energy to navigate the complex situation he'd found himself in. At the cashier, he paid quickly, his mind already back with Lila and June. As he drove back to the children's house, Keanu sipped his coffee and glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It read 11:35 p.m. The late hour only added to his sense of urgency. He hoped the children were okay, alone in that dark house. The image of their small forms huddled together in the darkness spurred him to drive a little faster, the bag of supplies a comforting weight in the passenger seat beside him. As Keanu pulled up to the dilapidated house, he felt a sense of unease settle over him. Something felt different, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what had changed. He gathered the supplies and approached the front door, his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. He raised his hand to knock, but before his knuckles could make contact with the worn wood, a sound from inside made him pause. It was an adult female voice, followed by the unmistakable sound of children whimpering. The stark contrast to his earlier visit immediately raised his concern. Keanu knocked firmly, his heart racing. After a moment, the door swung open, revealing a woman he didn't recognize. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair disheveled, and she swayed slightly as she stood in the doorway. It was clear she didn't recognize Keanu despite his celebrity status. "Who the hell are you?" she slurred, her words running together. Keanu tried to keep his voice calm and steady. "My name is Keanu. I met Lila, your daughter, at Walmart earlier. I've brought some food for the children." At the mention of food, the woman's eyes lit up. She grabbed at the bag of supplies, trying to snatch it from Keanu's hands. "Give it here," she demanded. Keanu held onto the bag, using it as leverage to keep the door open. "Are the children all right?" he asked, straining to see past her into the house. "They were eating milk powder when I was here earlier. I heard them crying just now." The woman's face darkened. "Mind your own business," she snapped, attempting to close the door. Keanu wedged his foot in the gap, preventing her from shutting him out. As he did so, movement behind the woman caught his eye. A man stumbled into view, his movements uncoordinated and jerky. In his hand, he waved a small packet of white powder. "Hey, baby," the man called out, seemingly oblivious to Keanu's presence. "I got the stuff. Let's have some fun. Don't worry about the brats. I've beat them enough to stay in their room. They won't bother us." The casual mention of abuse and the children's confinement confirmed Keanu's worst fears about their home environment. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and began dialing the authorities. The woman's eyes widened in panic. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, lunging for Keanu's phone. "Who are you calling?" A brief struggle ensued. Keanu tried to fend off the woman while maintaining his grip on both the phone and the bag of supplies. Behind them, the man had collapsed to the floor, mumbling incoherently. In the midst of the chaos, Keanu caught sight of Lila and June. They had appeared in the doorway of what he assumed was their room, watching with wide, frightened eyes as their mother wrestled with him. Lila had changed into a tattered pink shirt with a short boxer, its frayed edges speaking volumes about their living conditions. The sight of their fear-stricken faces steeled Keanu's resolve, filling him with a renewed determination to ensure the children would no longer have to endure such turmoil. "Go back inside, you little shy!" the woman yelled at the children, her words slurring together. Lila quickly pulled her brother back into the room, closing the door behind them. Keanu managed to break free from the woman's grasp, backing away as he continued his call to the police. The dispatcher on the other end of the line greeted him, and when they learned of his identity, they promised immediate action. The woman, realizing she couldn't stop the call, retreated into the house. The sound of a lock clicking into place echoed in the sudden silence, leaving Keanu standing alone on the porch, the crumpled bag of supplies still clutched in his hand, waiting for the authorities to arrive. The wail of sirens pierced the night air, growing louder as multiple police cars approached the house. Keanu stood on the porch, his heart racing as he watched the officers quickly exit their vehicles and approach the house. The lead officer, a stern-faced woman with graying hair, addressed Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Sergeant Martinez. Can you brief us on the situation?" Keanu quickly recounted the events of the evening, from his initial encounter with Lila at Walmart to the disturbing scene he had just witnessed. The officers listened intently, their expressions growing more serious with each detail. Sergeant Martinez nodded grimly when Keanu finished. She turned to her team, issuing rapid-fire orders. Two officers approached the front door, knocking firmly. "Police, open up!" one of them called out. Silence greeted their demand. The officers exchanged glances before the sergeant gave a curt nod. With practiced efficiency, they broke down the door, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the night. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Officers swarmed into the house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness until they found the light switch. Shouts and the sound of a brief struggle could be heard from inside. Moments later, the woman and man were led out in handcuffs, both looking disheveled and disoriented. The woman glared at Keanu as she was escorted to a waiting police car, but said nothing. The man seemed barely aware of his surroundings, mumbling incoherently as he was placed in a separate vehicle. Keanu's attention was drawn to the house as two more officers emerged, each gently guiding one of the children. Lila and June looked small and frightened in the harsh glare of the police lights, clinging to each other as they were led to a waiting vehicle. As the chaos of the arrest settled, Lila broke away from the officer and ran to Keanu. Her small face was a mixture of confusion and fear as she looked up at him. "Keanu," she said, her voice trembling, "what happened to Mommy? She go to jail?" The simple question, asked with such innocence, broke Keanu's heart. He crouched down to Lila's level, trying to find the right words to explain the complex situation to a 5-year-old. "Lila," he began gently, "your mommy needs help. The police are going to make sure she gets that help. But right now, the most important thing is making sure you and June are safe." Lila's lower lip trembled. "But I love Mommy," she whispered. "Can you help her not go to jail?" Keanu felt a lump form in his throat at the child's heartfelt plea. Despite the neglect and danger they had faced, Lila still loved her mother unconditionally. It was a stark reminder of the complex emotions involved in cases of child abuse and neglect. "I promise I'll do what I can to help your mommy," Keanu said softly, meeting Lila's eyes with gentle sincerity. "If she's willing to get help, like going to a place where people can help her become better, I'll try my best to support her too." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The police are going to figure out if your mommy can stay with you and June. But for now, we need to make sure you're both safe and okay." He carefully explained that they would be staying with a loving family while things were sorted out with their mother. He assured both siblings they would stay together, knowing how important it was for them to have each other during this difficult time. As he spoke, Sergeant Martinez approached, her face softening as she observed the interaction. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "we need to take the children to the station now. A social worker will meet us there to arrange emergency foster care. We'd appreciate if you could come to the station to give a full statement and also to provide support for the children. Your testimony will be crucial in ensuring these children's safety." Keanu thought briefly about his filming schedule and the long hours of driving ahead, but the officer was right. He couldn't just abandon them. Resolving to prioritize the children, Keanu nodded firmly. "Of course, I'll follow you there." He then turned back to Lila and June, crouching to meet their eyes. "The officer is going to take you to the station. It's a safe place," he explained gently. "I'll be right behind in my car, I promise. You're not alone in this." Lila hesitated but eventually nodded, holding tightly to June's tiny hand. Then she suddenly surprised Keanu by throwing her arms around him in a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've been so kind to us." Keanu felt a mix of emotions wash over him. Relief that they were safe, sadness at the circumstances that had led to this point, and a deep sense of responsibility to ensure they received the care and support they needed. As the officer carefully lifted June into the patrol car and helped Lila climb in after, Keanu felt an ache in his chest. The sight of their small faces framed by the car's interior light was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Quickly, before the officer pulled the car door closed, Keanu raised a hand to stop him. "And before you go." Keanu reached into the bag of supplies he had brought and handed Lila a piece of bread and a small juice box. "Here," he said gently, crouching to meet her eyes. "You told me you were hungry. Eat this, okay?" Lila accepted the food with a quiet thank you. She clutched the bread in one hand and the juice in the other, glancing down at June, who looked curiously at the juice box. With a soft smile, Lila held it out to her little brother, letting him take the first sip before taking one herself. Keanu stepped back and the officer closed the door. He then gave them a small wave. As the patrol car pulled away, the faint glow of its taillights disappearing into the night, Keanu stood in the silence, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He turned toward his car, knowing there was still so much to do to ensure the children's future would be brighter than their past. As the patrol car pulled away, Keanu walked back to his car, preparing to follow the police to the station. He started the engine and pulled away from the curb. His mind raced with the events of the night. The image of Lila and June's frightened faces was etched in his memory, their vulnerability a stark contrast to the life he usually led. Glancing at the clock on the dashboard, Keanu realized it was now well past midnight. His early morning filming schedule loomed, but the thought of simply driving away and returning to his normal life felt impossible after what he'd witnessed. He told himself some things were more important than work, no matter how high-profile the job might be. With a deep sigh, Keanu pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant, Patrick. Despite the late hour, Patrick answered on the second ring, his voice alert. "Keanu, is everything all right?" "Patrick, I'm sorry to bother you at this hour," Keanu began, his voice carrying a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "There's an emergency I need to take care of, and it might affect my schedule tomorrow. Could you let the director know there's a possibility of delays?" "Of course, Keanu, but are you certain?" Patrick responded, his concern unmistakable. "This is a major project. What should I tell them?" Keanu briefly explained the situation with Lila and June, careful not to divulge too many details. "I can't in good conscience just walk away from this," he concluded. "These kids need help, and I want to make sure they get it." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Patrick responded, his tone steady and understanding. "I get it, Keanu. I'll handle everything on my side. Just focus on what you need to do." "Thank you, Patrick," Keanu replied sincerely. "And as always, please keep this away from the media. I'd prefer to keep things quiet." "Surely, Keanu." Relieved by his assistant's support, Keanu ended the call and focused on the road ahead, following the red and blue lights of the police cars to the station. As he drove, his eyes fell on the remaining grocery supplies sitting in his passenger seat. The simple items, originally intended just to feed two hungry children, now symbolized a deeper commitment to changing their lives. Keanu's involvement had evolved from a chance encounter to a moral obligation he couldn't ignore. He knew the road ahead would be challenging. There would be legal hurdles, potential media scrutiny, and the complex process of helping a family heal from neglect and addiction. But as he drove through the quiet streets, Keanu felt a sense of purpose settling over him. He thought about Lila's brave face as she cared for her younger brother, and June's silent trust in his sister. Their resilience in the face of such difficult circumstances was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Keanu had seen Lila and June, not just as fleeting faces in a tragic moment, but as individuals deserving of care and attention. Their plight had pierced through the layers of his world. He knew that his resources and influence could make a real difference in their lives, and he was determined to see it through. As Keanu navigated each turn, the stark contrast between his own life of privilege and the children's dire situation weighed heavily on his mind. The disparity underscored a powerful truth: the ease with which society's most vulnerable can slip into invisibility, unnoticed and unheard, unless someone chooses to truly see them. Pulling into the police station parking lot, Keanu knew that his life had changed irrevocably. The path ahead was uncertain, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, driven by the memory of two small children who had touched his heart and awakened a new sense of purpose in his life.